Happy politics, and welcome to what I know is your favorite BC politics podcast. It's BC Poly Hot Stove. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner still. Whatever it is of this pandemic. One day we'll be together again, Jordan.
We've both been double dosed. We could be together, but it's fine. We just happen to live across the Salish Sea from one another. It's Jordan Bateman, VP Communications, Independent Contractors and Businesses Association.
Jordan, it is the dog days of summer. Mm-hmm. This is often when the news in politics slows and grinds to a halt. Luckily for you and me and our listeners and viewers, that is not quite the case. There's still enough to talk about this week. Let's start with what we talked about last week, and that is the heat wave that BC experienced last weekend and beyond, and unfortunately, the subsequent the death of hundreds of people. It's a sad state of affairs. Today, the news is that the coroner service has asked local doctors not to issue death certificates because they want to, they want to issue those themselves. They want to investigate and make a proper tally of the number of fatalities that are directly attributable to the heat wave, so much as such determination can be made. The NDP have held off on calling for a commission to look at what could have been done differently and what should be done in the future, because sadly this will happen again. The coroner service making that directive makes that a little more difficult, and I'm wondering if we might see a very small reversal from the NDP government on this.
Yeah, there's a few points. I mean, first of all, I finally saw the number of what an average week would have rendered as far as loss of life. A couple hundred people, I believe, across British Columbia was kind of the expected number. Yeah. 700, obviously far beyond that. So that is, the number was troubling anyways. Now that we have more context as to, it's whether it's at 2.5 times, my math isn't great, but that is especially worrisome. I've been following people like Terry Lake, who runs the association that looks over private long-term care. He's been very forthcoming with information and concerns about what's happening. And this idea that, perhaps people in long-term care were actually better off in this situation because they had aides and workers who were looking out for them, rather than the independent living seniors, where it seems like anecdotally a lot of these deaths occurred. People who just didn't get the help, didn't get the check, and passed away in their own homes. It's awful, and I'm glad the coroner service is looking into it. I'm glad that they're taking very careful steps. I think we will see recommendations out of that. I suspect the NDP will be a lot more sensitive to it than they were at first blush. There's a lot there. I wonder about, we've talked a lot in this province and this country about climate change. BC, first jurisdiction to bring in a carbon tax, once revenue neutral, no longer. I wonder if we would be better off talking about climate change mitigation now at this point rather than prevention. Yeah. We are such a small percentage of overall greenhouse gas emissions. I think BC is dwarfed by, one province in China would dwarf what we do in British Columbia. And we can talk all we want about getting down to, zero GHGs or net zero or whatever. The problem is you're talking about taking a teaspoon of water out of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. I mean, it just is not, that is not where the value is for British Columbians. So if this is the new way of life, if this is the new thing that's happening, then we need to be looking at policies and ways to mitigate that. And that means things that have been unpopular in BC for a long time, things that, in fact, I would suspect many climate change activists would oppose, things like air conditioning in homes, air conditioning in condos. Those are big energy drains, but if this is the new future, if we're going to have 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks a year of weather that's similar to Phoenix, you've got to have the mitigation in place. So I'm sort of coming around to this idea that prevention is almost pointless at this point. Like for British Columbia, we're such a small player in all this that mitigation and preparing for the worst might be better.
Yeah, I mean, I know there are those who watch the show and listen and will automatically leap to the worst possible interpretation of what you and I are saying. Is that it's not as though we shouldn't be taking climate action. It's that, to be realistic, I mean, climate change will either happen or be mitigated, I should say, not happen or not, based on what happens in China and India and the United States. Yeah. And that's kind of it. And I mean, I've seen people on Twitter say things like, okay, well, this proves that we need to charge more for parking in downtown Victoria. That's climate action.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. Kudos for thinking outside the box and coming up with more ideas. But the idea that charging for parking in a city of 350,000 is going to, somehow make any kind of a difference whatsoever it's just not true. And that doesn't mean we can't talk about local ideas, but, we have had this peculiar I want to say predilection in Canada and BC in particular, in thinking that, what we do here can either, accelerate or stop it. And again, the math just doesn't bear that out. Not saying don't take local action. Every bit does help, but we're talking about a fraction of a fraction. Yeah. And it's important to recognize that. And you're right. You mentioned weather like Phoenix. I mean, in some respects, when the Canadian habit of looking at a place like Phoenix, when they get, a snowstorm once every 20 years, and the city being completely unprepared because, why would the city of Phoenix keep snowplows? That just doesn't make any sense. In a similar way, although more grim, places like Phoenix are going to look at the west coast of Canada and say, well, of course they don't have air conditioning. But if that's going to become more regular, then if we're going to prevent hundreds of deaths, things like that are going to need to be put in place.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be just air conditioning. It can be geothermal, heat exchange,
exactly.
That sort of thing. There are ways to do it.
Yeah. Heat pumps.
Yeah, heat pumps, exactly. Township of Langley, where I live, they're now looking again at their tree canopy, wanting to encourage more tree planting. So they're working on policies and that's all great. But we can spend billions. We can spend tens of billions of dollars in this country. We can spend billions in British Columbia on trying to prevent climate change, or we could take that money and just say, look, let's prepare. And look, what's the downside? Okay, so let's say we spend billions of dollars and we build up all the dikes along the Fraser River or whatever. There were floods in, the flood of 48. Like, there were big floods anyways. That still does render important agricultural land safer. It does, reduce property loss. Whether or not, it's there. It'll be helpful no matter what, right? I just look at this and I think, we're obviously not prepared for this. And look, the heat dome, we're told, once in a lifetime. I've just come through a once in a lifetime pandemic though, so I'm a bit like, how many once in a lifetimes do I gotta deal with here? But we have had in the past few years, we've had 40-degree weather, maybe not as sustained as this was. We've had certainly high 30s where I am in Langley. It's time to start, having those tougher conversations like, should we be encouraging heat exchanges? Should we be encouraging all sorts of different air conditioning, canopies, anything you can do to create shade? Municipalities obviously need to review their hot weather plans. They have cold weather plans. They open cold weather stations for those who are homeless. We need to have hot weather ones. This was compounded. Go ahead.
I was really struck, not to jump on you, but I was really struck last week when we were talking about the heat wave, and you were talking about seeing people in the mall in Burnaby there, and clearly people just there to escape the heat. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We don't have anything like that set up. Cold air stations, places of retreat you can go, and because we have never needed them before. Yeah. But it sounds like we've been warned about this for quite some time. We're going to need them in the future. So if we can take an opportunity now to learn some of these lessons and identify places we could set up and have at least ready and designated as, cold air islands. My God, why would we not do that?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Look, the pandemic did make it worse because a lot of the community centers aren't up and running yet, aren't fully open. Libraries weren't fully open. They were still doing the hand the books through the window kind of thing. But that's not an excuse. That's 700 people passed away. 500 more than would have been expected, and we've got to do better than that. So kudos to the coroner for taking it seriously when the government kind of wasn't at the beginning. I appreciate that. And, also I want to say kudos to the BC Press Gallery. I know Palmer, Baldry have written a lot on this. I've talked about this a lot. They're not letting it go. And at a time where we have pandemic fatigue, and I think a lot of those reporters would rather just kind of pack it in and go to the lake or go, kind of disappear for a period of time. They're still holding government to account. That's important in this too.
Yeah. If you're a fan of the Netflix show The Crown, and I think you are, you've mentioned this before, in the very first season, there's an episode that deals with the deadly smog in London in the early 1950s that killed people. And there's the Prime Minister at the time, Winston Churchill. There's a number of scenes of him saying, this is just weather. Why is everyone so upset? There's nothing we can do. It's the weather. And this actually sounded very similar to some of the protestations and explanations given by John Horgan and others. I mean, we thought of this as a weather event, and both of them are right to an extent, but they're also not, in that it's important to learn lessons so that people don't die. Yeah. The next thing we should talk about is sort of related in terms of climate change and things that we can do to mitigate some of that, and that is also, well, it ties into politics as well, and that is the massive SkyTrain extension announcement last week. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, John Horgan, and everyone else they could bring there to announce that it was finally being extended to Surrey and Langley. But I think you're about to argue that we're forgetting somebody else here who can probably more plausibly claim this as a major victory.
Yeah, let's talk Surrey politics, Maclean. I know it's I know it's very foreign to those folks who live in Victoria, Vancouver, and elsewhere in the province. I live next door in Langley. I've had a bit of a balcony view of it for a bit, but I want to talk about Surrey politics. First, I want to talk about one little thing. The announcement was really a re-announcement of a re-announcement. Like, let's be clear. It's good to have the financial commitment. The money's not in the bank at TransLink or the province. It's. I think I remember looking at the federal budget, and it was like years down the road. I think you almost had to re-elect the Liberals twice in order to get the money actually out the door. But whatever. It's coming. Every party's going to make that promise. The NDP will make it. The Tories will make it. It's almost a nothing burger as far as that goes. However, except for one person, and this is the much maligned, much bashed, much loathed, much poked at Doug McCallum, Mayor of Surrey. And Doug McCallum ran in the last election in 2018 in Surrey on two platforms, two pieces of platform. Number one, a Surrey police force instead of the RCMP. You'll recall we were in the middle of a gang war, and there was a sense that the RCMP were not doing enough. I can tell you that it's a little bit more controversial now. We can come back to that in a second. Remind me, I've got an anecdote on that. But also he said, forget this light rail thing that Lindy Hepner and Surrey First proposed, and TransLink wants to do, that kind of loops part of Surrey and together. I'm going to take that money and we're going to get SkyTrain to Langley. And the scoffs happen. Oh, that can't happen. It's too far down the track, so to speak. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's not enough money to pay for SkyTrain. Oh, Doug McCallum, he's old and he's lost it. And blah, blah. Lo and behold, McCallum gets elected because guess what? People in Surrey were tired of gang wars and didn't want light rail. Fast forward to this announcement. People still kicking at McCallum a little bit like, we told you it would be more expensive to do SkyTrain to Langley. It's billions more. Except for one little fact. It's no more expensive for Doug McCallum in Surrey or for TransLink. Their commitment essentially stays the same, and they're going to get a SkyTrain down into Langley City. That is, a promise delivered on. I don't think anyone really thought light rail would be further down the road at this point. Like, I think both expected it to be right round. So even the idea that maybe we lost 2 or 3 years of useful life has disappeared. But I gotta say, kudos to Doug McCallum. And I, for one, there's this narrative out there that Doug McCallum's goose is cooked in the next election. I don't see it. I think Doug McCallum has surprised people before. He'll surprise people again. There has not been a left-wing mayor of Surrey since Bob Bowes in the very early 90s.
Wow, deep cut.
Yeah. So you're talking a long time with center-right, frankly, right-of-center mayors, not even center. Don't bet against Doug McCallum. The other side is split. There's like 3 or 4 councillors who are kind of kicking tires. If a Diane Watts comes out of retirement, that might be a game changer, but I don't get the sense that she wants to. So I wouldn't be surprised if Doug McCallum was reelected.
I mean, you're right to preface it and bail me out preemptively by saying you in Victoria won't understand this. And you're right, I'm not a Surrey guy, I'm not from there. But I always was struck by the idea that Surrey would want a transit system that wouldn't link up with Metro Vancouver. That just seems nonsensical to me. And so, I mean, whatever you think of Doug McCallum and the idea, to me, connecting it with SkyTrain was always the more logical, if yes, potentially more expensive solution. But it's the fastest growing city in the province, you know?
Yeah. The theory was that, in defense of Linda and Diane and the light rail proponents in Surrey, the theory was you didn't want to create a transit system that was all about getting people out of Surrey into other places. Light rail.
Fair enough. That's a good point.
Yeah, light rail seemed like it was more kind of like moving people around Surrey friendly. And you could go up to Guildford, and you could go down to Surrey Centre, where the new City Hall and Library complex is, and you could go out to you go to South Surrey, like, you know. And at one point it was thought light rail would be cheaper. The way TransLink was managing that file, it didn't seem to be all that much cheaper, to be honest. You know, street grade, blah blah blah. Okay, so and Surrey is different than Vancouver in that. It was developed as a suburban community, so the road allowances are a lot wider than in Vancouver. So putting an at-grade rail in Vancouver would tie up, you know, a considerable amount of traffic. Putting it in Surrey, well, you know, you could probably get some spots where you had its own laneway. So that was sort of the theory there. But McCallum just threw down his head and was like, forget it. You know, I'd rather have one SkyTrain line that actually, you know, goes all the way to Cloverdale, Clayton, and Langley, than have two lesser used light rail lines. And like I said, you know, you can't argue with the results of the election. He won. He's, you know, lost some support. I'm not going to say it's going to be a slam dunk for him election, but this idea that he's a dead duck, I think, is more wishful thinking than anything else by his opponents.
And at the risk of dangerously overinflating your ego, there is a piece, if you're watching and listening to this, if you Google the Orca Jordan Bateman, my co-host, and Doug McCallum, you'll find a piece from right around that time of his election, I want to say early 2019, saying that, I believe the title is something like, "For your consideration, the region's #1 power broker is Doug McCallum." And then sort of outlining this sort of, you remember writing that now, sort of saying, look, the way things are lining up. And at the time, it was somewhat, I guess, counterintuitive against popular wisdom. And you were saying, look, I know everyone's making fun of Doug McCallum for this and this and this. But if you look at these other things, which arguably are more substantive, and we'll still be talking about 2-3 years from now, well, I haven't read this piece. I actually stumbled across it a couple days ago, but I submit that if you read it now, you'll see that Jordan may have been on something there.
Yep, that's just a hat rack. One more thing on his other promise about the RCMP and Surrey Police. They're headed towards a Surrey Police Department. They have a chief in place. They're starting to put senior staff together. They're starting to flesh out the compensation packages for officers to go to the Surrey Police. They're very they're good packages. Like, the salary will be higher for a Surrey Police officer than for an RCMP officer. And they're working on the pension portability, and that's kind of the last hurdle. If they get that, the RCMP officers will flock, I think, to the Surrey Police Force. Now, all that to say this, the #1 problem with the RCMP, not just in Surrey, but in Langley and all across the province, is vacancies. So I read a stat where, like, Langley Township has funded something like 20 new police positions in the past 3 or 4 years, and something like only 6 of them have been filled. And it's because they're not turning out enough RCMP officers out of Depot and Regina. They're not training enough. So they're hopelessly behind on recruitment and on getting officers onto the street. And that's a problem. So, you know, you have Surrey that's been feeling like it's been funding RCMP officers. They probably have, for a big force like Surrey compared to Langley, you know, the same ratio would be 30, 40 vacancies. That's a lot of cops who aren't on the beat. And you can bet that Surrey will be much more, as a police force, will be much more disciplined and much more cutthroat in recruiting, simply because, you know, they don't have to balance, you know, this police force, Surrey's police force, with North Battleford's. You know, like, they can focus fully on just trying to staff out their own force.
Yeah. And the politics is not what matters there. Mm-hmm. But to put the political hat on for a second, if you are involved in Surrey politics at any level, and there, I mean, you mentioned the gang war, and there has been, there has been some incidents there, and people say, well, what about officers on the streets? And then you get into exactly the scenario you just described, where it's like, well, we've been funding the positions, but we can't fill them for these reasons, and your average voter just goes, I don't care, fix it. Yeah. And so that is part of the impetus, whether you're for it or against it, and there's a spirited debate happening right now, whether you're for or against an independent Surrey police service. That is part of the genesis of this, is, you know, politicians and leaders being frustrated that, you know, we're doing what we can on our end, we're funding these positions. They're not being filled. You're right. But it's not our fault.
Yeah.
Voters don't care about it. It's not our fault.
Yeah. I do find it funny that some of these defenders of the RCMP in Surrey, despite all the empty positions, are the same people who are bashing the BC Liberals government and federal government in the Collin Commission for having RCMP and national forces wholly understaffed and unprepared to deal with money laundering. So it is kind of amusing to me. Like, it's, pick your offense, like pick the side of the fence you want to be on. But this has been a problem for years and years. When I was back on council a million years ago in Langley, we would always have these open seats, and at the end of every year you'd be like, oh, township has a surplus. And then you look at the surplus, and 30% of it would be because officers that you had funded for the RCMP hadn't materialized.
We usually, we always focus on BC politics, and this next story is not BC politics and involves a politician that is not British Columbian, but it is worth mentioning anyway because, well, wow. This is quietly in the ramp up. The ramp up, is that a word? Mm-hmm. It is now. To what is going to be another federal election this fall. There, I said it. One of the National Party leaders is quietly, well, not so quietly, being undermined by her own party in ways that are almost, too bizarrely petty to believe. And I'm talking about still new Green leader Annamie Paul. How else do you describe it other than sort of a quiet coup among her own party's senior executive to, if not remove her, then to undermine her at every turn? The latest development is that the National Party executive has voted to remove funds from her own election campaign, the local riding there, which is Toronto Centre, which she finished second in the last by-election. So, I mean, it's not like it's a complete no hope, although admittedly a long shot. It's inescapable, Jordan. I will put this to you. In the era we're in right now, in 2021, we can't ignore the fact that she is a woman, a woman of color, and a Jewish woman of color. Normally, this is the kind of thing that's held up as a symbol of progress, that, she was chosen as someone who can lead a viable national party in this country. And yet her own party is doing everything in its can before she's even had the chance to test her appeal and ideas in an election to get rid of her. It's ugly, and it's happening as we speak.
Yeah, in our email exchange before the program, Maclean, I sent you this. Okay, the Fed Greens have lost their minds to the point that even I can't ignore them. And I've studiously ignored them, pretty relentlessly here. And yet, this has just gone from bad to worse to worser to abysmal to cataclysmic for the Green Party of Canada. Now, I'm not going to shed a tear when the Green Party of Canada disappears after this next election. I don't particularly like their policies. I find them naive and, frankly, foolish and dangerous. But whatever. More power to you if you can get votes. I can't see them holding on to any seat. Like, this has been an unmitigated disaster of their own causing. And here's the curious thing to me. There's only one person in that party who has any kind of clout or public image, and that's the former leader, Elizabeth May. And man, has she been silent on this. Now, I don't know, maybe you're on the island, maybe you're seeing more on the island media than I see here in the mainland.
Nope. She
has ghosted that party, ghosted this issue, or has she? So, you kind of wonder, right? Like, this National Council isn't doing this willy-nilly. Like, someone's herding the cats there, which is Andrew Weaver and Sonia First will tell you is difficult to do in Green Party context to herd cats.
Accurate.
Is it Elizabeth May? I don't know. Is she the puppet master trying to ruin this all? And it seems that doesn't seem intuitive to me, but she could just come out and be like, guys, smarten up. Like, you're throwing away my 15 years of work building this party from nothing to 3 giant seats in the
level. The level immediately above nothing.
Yes. Nothing to slightly above nothing. Instead, disappeared. Not a word either way, which kind of makes you wonder if she's tacitly supporting this effort to get rid of Annamie Paul.
It's these are fair questions to ask, because all it would take for Elizabeth May is a tweet.
Yes.
I fully support our leader. She was chosen by the members of the party, and, until she decides otherwise, she has my full support. Look, if you're Elizabeth May and you want the leadership back, which is what everyone seems to think is going to happen, play the long game. Let Adam E. Paul fight this next election in a hopeless cause against a popular government, and probably lose her seat in Toronto Centre, most likely. And, play the odds. But if you're Elizabeth May, look, you've had either 4 or 5 elections, and it hasn't happened for whatever reason. But no, there was no rising green tide for you to catch. And so, I don't know. We'll see. If this was happening in any other party with again, black woman of color who is Jewish, being so, undermined on such a comprehensive and petty level, it would be scandalous, would it not? I mean,
well, imagine the press that would be out there right now in the parallel universe of Leslyn Lewis, Conservative Party leader, facing a revolt from the old white guys on her council. There'd be outrage. There would be, it would be relentless media pressure. There'd be special. Rosemary Barton would have special, specials, entire specials, not just panels on the issue. Like, it would be vicious. But because it's the Greens, I guess they're small and none of us really have any visibility into their politics and whatever, it kind of gets passed over. But
I go back and forth on this because, there is a persuasive case to be made that, perhaps we pay too much attention to the federal Green Party. It's 5% seems to be right where they're at, and that's fine. And it's not that it's illegitimate, but we can talk about it too much, is what I'm saying. And there is that viewpoint that's out there. Fair. But what is happening now is just so petty and ugly that I feel it behooves us to at least acknowledge it and call attention to it and say, because you're quite right. If this was Leslyn Lewis or anyone, a Liberal leader, an NDP leader, if Jagmeet Singh was being undermined by the old white guys on council, it would be scandalous. And again, I would agree with that. It being scandalous, not undermining Jagmeet Singh. So at the very least, you got to give her an election. She was chosen by the members, and go from there. If she's a disaster, fine.
Yeah.
These things happen all the time.
Totally.
But to not even let her have a shot is just ridiculous.
Yeah, and the election, we're in the cycle. This thing's coming. So you're going to replace her. Let's say you're right. Okay, let's say you get her to bow out and resign next week. Let's say you're 6 weeks to an election call.
Yeah.
Even Elizabeth May is you bring her back, what is that going to matter? You're not getting into the debates. You're not getting into anything.
It is with the greatest reluctance that I assume the leadership of
That's a job I never asked for, but has been thrust upon me, and if asked, I will serve.
Well, we talked about you being a prophet earlier in the show. We'll see if it happens twice.
Yes. Okay, hang on. So one more thing to talk about, because I mentioned Andrew Weaver.
Yes.
Doc Weaver and I, we have an up and down relationship. Sometimes I love him, sometimes I loathe him. I love him this week because he took on Ben Isett, who is, frankly, the worst counselor in Canada. And good on you, Doc Weaver. I know that you have friends on probably in Issett's camp, his camp. I know that he also teaches at, doesn't he teach at UVic as well?
By Isett? I think maybe.
So, there's that kind of thing. But good on Doc Weaver for calling it like he sees it.
Yeah. Well, just if you're not familiar with the issue, I encourage you to check out. I think the place I discovered this video was Adam Sterling's Twitter feed. It's Ben Isett at the Fairy Creek protest site, in which, it's a long video, I don't know, 7-8 minutes. I encourage you to watch it for yourself, get the whole context. Anyway, it's Ben Isett there. Trying to, I don't want to use the word bribe, but encourage a tow truck operator with money to leave and not enforce the injunction as ordered by the court and contracted by Teal Jones. And so, again, I'm not going to comment on it. You can watch it, and I think you'll probably come to the same conclusion as Andrew Weaver did.
And also ignoring the express wants and concerns and feelings of the First Nation involved. So. Real classy, Ben, real classy. But you Victoria people, you keep re-electing him, so you've no one to blame but yourselves.
He does have a constituency here. There's no denying that. We'll see what happens next year, and then, whether he runs again, indeed, or what happens to him.
And then the other issue we should talk about is JWR, Jody.
Yes. Well, where do you begin? The smart money appears to be that she's going to run for mayor of Vancouver, joining a very crowded field. and we'll see if that happens. There are those who say that would completely change the race. One of our Orca contributors, Katie Merrifield, is very sanguine on that. We'll get to that if that happens. I do think it's kind of a shame that she's not running again. She was, if nothing else, purely selfishly speaking, she made federal politics much more interesting. Yep. I think it's healthy to have the occasional independent voice, and she was a good counterpoint to a lot of what the Liberals point to as successes in that. She was kind of a constant reminder of some of the mistakes, we shall say. Yep. So yeah, I mean, her reasons are her own, and I'm not questioning any of them. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is the ugly message from the Minister Carolyn Bennett asking about her pension.
Disgusting.
We'll see whatever. Jody Wilson-Raybould is a force, and whatever she does next, she will be very effective in. Whether it's the Vancouver mayoral election or whatever. Yeah, she's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think Affleck as well was really high on her chances. I'm not so sure.
You're right.
I think you do need to win a mayoralty race. You do need an organization. You do need lists. Sure, she has it in Vancouver Granville, but it's a lot larger than just Vancouver Granville. You have to have a good team. I'm not familiar enough with who helps her and who works with her on their team, so I can't really say that. But yeah, Affleck was basically, see you later, Candy Stewart. I was pretty surprised by how adamant they were. Now, George knows Vancouver a heck of a lot better than I do. So I take that with some. So I buck him on this with some caution, but I'm not so sure. And if you're Jody Wilson-Raybould, I'm not sure, why would you want to be mayor of Vancouver? There comes this point where oh, you should run for mayor, and then you run for mayor, and then you're the mayor of Vancouver, and you have no slate. You have you're herding. Speaking of herding cats, council is all over the place. You're going to end up with 3 NPA and 2 of this and 1 of that, and 2 Greens, and this kind of weird mix that you're constantly trying to stitch together governing coalitions. And I just look at her background, the things she's been passionate about in public policy up until now. And I'm just not sure how being in the mayor's chair for 4 years advances those causes as much as, say, starting a think tank or, working on, there's other ways she can advance the causes that seem more personal and more long-term to her. So I'm not sure, where there's smoke, there's often fire, but it's not, I'm not sure, why would you just jump in and do it?
Well, and there's been a lot of discussion, some of it on Orca Airwaves, about Jody Wilson-Raybould potentially running for mayor of Vancouver based on her not saying she was going to do it, but not stamping the rumor out decisively enough, So it may just be that she has no intention of doing this and just, it didn't come out quite right. She could have just, there's no reason for her to spit on the ground if someone asks her, would you ever do this?
Yeah.
So we have no idea is what I'm trying to say, and this is something we'll keep watching.
You and I have been around politicians enough. Very rarely do they just outright rule anything out because you never know, right? She may wake up tomorrow and someone may come to her and be like, "Hey, we want to put a team around you. Let's go." And okay, well maybe I'll look at that. But I just don't see how it fits with the long-term issues that she wants to address. And being mayor of Vancouver sounds great, but it's a weak mayor system.
It's true.
You're 1 vote. You have some control over timing and things like that, but it's not like you have a blank check to you can use it as a bully pulpit in for reconciliation issues, for example. I think pretty effectively, and especially with such strong leadership right now with the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I think you could really I can see where you can kind of connect those in and do well, but it's not the most natural extension to get rid of some of these long-standing federal policies that are disadvantaging First Nations.
Yeah, well, I mean, if the Liberals win the next election, if she ran for mayor and won, it sure would make future SkyTrain opening events a little more interesting.
That would be entertaining for sure.
Speaking of files that we will watch without a lot of real news to talk about this week, every week I think we talk a little bit about the ongoing BC Liberal leadership race. You'll correct me, I don't think there's anything really new since last week, but you had in our email that you referenced earlier, you said, remind me to talk about Ellis. So Jordan, I am reminding you to talk about Ellis Ross.
Yes, first of all, they're starting to travel a little bit. So Falcon, Ross, they were in FSJ. Fort St. John. Kevin Falcon has a speaking gig scheduled with the Prince George Chamber of Commerce, which it looks like he's going to be doing in person. So there is that kind of that movement going on. But Ellis Ross sent out an email to the membership, his campaign, saying, let's sign up. I forget what the number is. They wanted to sign up 1,000 members for Ellis by such and such a date. Okay, pretty standard. But it's the first email that has come out where it's been like the explicit, find 3 of your friends and get them signed up as BC Liberals to vote for Ellis. And I can tell you that within 48 hours, I'm president of the Langley East Riding Association, so I get a little alert whenever someone signs up for Langley East online. We had 5 or 6 new members. And, I'm like, okay, it could just be coincidental that, maybe other campaigns are doing the same thing behind the scenes. But it seemed pretty coincidental that it came within that 48-hour period of Ellis doing it. Now, 5 or 6, okay, times 87 ridings, that's, 500-ish new members. That's not bad.
Nothing to sneeze at.
No, for sure. So I'm waiting to see if I get another email from Ellis Ross, Ellis Ross's campaign saying, we're halfway there, 500, blah, blah, blah. But, so they are still working very quietly, trying to put groups together, and off they go.
As we speak, well, not literally as we speak, because I'm doing the show now and it has my full attention, but today I am writing a piece about sort of stories that are going to quietly bubble away in the background and may pop up over the course of the summer. And one of them, I talk about the BC Liberal Leadership Campaign, and I say basically essentially what you just did now, in that, the campaigns, both declared and probably undeclared, are going to be touring around, and it's not the stuff that you're going to see on the front page of the Vancouver Sun. It's not, headline grabbing stuff unless one of them makes a mistake. It's going to be exactly as you described. It's going to be a local story in Cranbrook about Michael Lee being there, or you mentioned Kevin Falcon in Fort St. John. Those are the kinds of things you're going to quietly see bubbling away in the background that, again, may not grab headlines across the province, but such is the lifeblood of politics. And that will be going on as, all summer and in fact all year.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we've talked before about the barbecue circuit, probably pointed to talk about in the week of Calgary Stampede, which is the ultimate in barbecue circuits. More pancakes and barbecues, I'm led to understand. But this will continue to bubble away, and we'll see what happens. But they're out there, they're working. And just because the big media aren't reporting on it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Yeah, exactly. That is all for this week, at least that I have. If you have anything to add, summer dog days, they're a little slower, but that's okay.
That's right. We've stretched this out to a proper show. I'm still waiting for tsn.ca. Oh, sorry, Jillian Stead, you can log off now. I'm waiting for tsn.ca to give me my BC Lions preview, because other than Mike Riley, I couldn't name another BC Lion on the team. I think Brian Burnham's still there, but who knows? I got to look.
He is.
So that's good. Feels like the CFL is happening. And then, did you watch? From there. Were you a Euro Cup guy? Were you watching that?
Not at all.
Okay.
I happened to be at my father's place, my parents' place, over the weekend, and he was wearing his. He's Scottish, but he was wearing a Team England shirt. I really don't understand why, but that's okay. And one of his sons-in-law is Italian, and so yes, there's a little bit of family tension there, but there might have been some mean texts exchanged in the K family. But so that was the only part. I saw half of that game, and that's the only soccer I have seen this year.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, I find soccer incredibly dull. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I've never really watched it. I mean, I tuned in for like 30 seconds and was like, nope, I still remember this is dull.
I went to one game live. I've been to one game in my life live. It was a Whitecaps game, and like you, I've never been a soccer guy, but it's more fun live than it is watching on TV. I don't get it at all. I had a good time at the game. I'd go back, but I can't imagine watching it on TV. I feel the same way about baseball. Really fun live, not on TV.
Yeah. I've been watching a lot of baseball. My kid's on the summer team here in Langley, so I've been it's like an every night thing. It's like a major league schedule almost. So I've been enjoying that, but I am completely unhelpful to him as far as some of the dads hang around Maclean. They're like, oh yeah, I've been working with my kid, and I got him to shorten his swing and move it. And I'm like, oh geez, am I supposed to be doing this? Because I have no idea, dude. Just get up there and swing hard.
They're talking about swinging techniques, and on the ride home, you guys are. So what do you think of McCallum's chances next year?
Yeah, exactly. I think the Skytrain's going to work, Jack. I think it's going to work. It's going to be great.
The long term, it's more helpful. We'll see.
For sure.
Anyway, until next week, he's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. Happy politics.